I'd like to start by thanking everyone for logging in tonight for what's the first of what I hope will be an ongoing series of conversations that we're going to have about the future of entertainment. Obviously, that's a conversation that can happen at any time, but it's particularly relevant and interesting and uncertain right now in this particular moment in the history of entertainment. And we're going to take a look at a variety of things over the next month or two. Certainly, we're going to look at distribution, studio production, and new platforms, et cetera. But I'm really excited tonight to have a conversation with Ted Mundorff, who is the president and chief operating officer of ArcLight Cinemas and Pacific Theaters. And I should also just quickly mention that Ted was also the president and CEO of Landmark Theaters. And we're going to talk about that just based on some discussion that Ted and I had recently. There's a lot of things that tie back into his time at Landmark, but he did actually have many, many years at ArcLight Cinemas and Pacific before going to Landmark. So that will also hopefully offer us some perspective on where it was then and where it's going now. So let's give we can't really give a warm welcome to Ted Mundorff, but know that somewhere out there people are clapping virtually. And by the way, just a quick rule, guys, I have your the chat function off and the microphone off. When we go to audience questions, just use the hand raise function and I'll call on you and we'll do it one-on-one. So Ted, thank you so much for doing this.
Well, thank you for having me, Alex.
I think it would be really useful to start if you could tell us in your own words a little bit about your career with ArcLight, then to Landmark, then back to ArcLight.
I did, but prior to that, I worked in distribution. I'd worked for Paramount Pictures. I had worked with a couple other exhibition companies. I had worked independently and distributed a film nationally. So I've had a little taste of multiple things, going back to, frankly, high school when I started in movie theaters. So been a long career in the same business that survived all these years.
What was your first job at a movie theater?
Usher.
I also
$1.35 an hour.
Wow. I hope you got tipped. So tell us a little bit about the decision to go back to ArcLight and a little bit about sort of the differences that you see in terms of, where Landmark was when you left and what ArcLight is now.
Wow. Well, I left Landmark in end of October of this last year and agreed to go back to ArcLight in mid-February of this year. So there was a period of time where I was, hanging out, kind of like what we're doing now. When Chris Foreman, who I've known for a long, long time, asked me, a bunch of questions about coming back and, what I thought about the business and we just had a normal conversation about business, and he said, you think you could help me out and help us out? And I said, I'd love to give that a go. And so here we are. And 3 weeks later, the virus hit and we were shutting down theaters and furloughing people. And it's not really what I signed up for, but I'm really glad I'm on board so that I can help out and move this forward.
Someone's audio on? Nope. Okay. That was unusual. Okay, so I'd like to actually talk about the current moment where exhibitors have been forced to close the theaters, because I feel like that's a good starting point. Not exactly the conversation I thought we were going to have when we first put this on the books, but let's talk about how the current climate of uncertainty is particularly bad for the exhibition part of the entertainment industry. And I think the first thing I wanted to ask you is, how is ArcLight positioning itself to survive the lack of revenue generated by ticket sales. We've seen a few different strategies from a couple of really sort of small independent chains where they're partnering with distribution companies, small distribution companies, to have virtual screenings. But I haven't seen anything like that come from Pacific. So I'm curious if you could talk a little bit about how you guys are weathering the storm until you get to reopen.
First of all, the reason to partner with some of the smaller distributors on some of their streaming services, Magnolia, Kino Lorber, et cetera, is really just to have a place for our customers, our guests to go and feel comfortable that we're still curating some product. That we are probably will announce something pretty soon in that area. But it is, be clear, that is not a revenue stream at all. So this is, I've seen some numbers come through, and it's very, very small. So, but to answer the bigger question is we're trying to figure it out. No one has that answer yet, and unfortunately, and so far there isn't a right answer, there isn't a wrong answer, there just isn't an answer, and it's not just the movie theater business that is trying to figure it out. It's basically all of retail, all of the entertainment industry, and frankly, it's just not exhibition that has been shut down. Production's been shut down. So unless you have a film in post right now, you're not working. So it's across the board. So we continue to look at programs. We continue to try to figure out how we're going to how we're going to move forward and what we're going to do when we move forward. So how we're going to prepare the movie theaters, which we were working on at when we went to social distancing the last couple of days before using LA County before the county shut us down completely. So it's been a lot of discussion and a lot of thought, but I don't think anyone has that answer yet.
So for a long time now, smaller distributors have been releasing films day and date, but traditionally the big studios haven't done that with their blockbuster tentpole films. And Universal, I think, sort of broke a very long pact about not putting a massive film to an online streaming service before its theatrical run. And I'm curious to know, first of all, I guess how you feel about that, but also if you feel like that's going to impact things considerably when theaters are back open.
It's a great question. I think a few things are happening. Yes, there's been smaller distributors, not many of them, through the last 15 years, going back to a film called Bubble, which was released, it was a Steven Soderbergh film, and was released around 2005 from memory. And that was the first, you could get it in a theater, you could get it anywhere you wanted. So Magnolia on some of their, and that was a Magnolia release, which was a sister company to the company I was working for, which was Landmark. So, and then through the years, IFC has continued that. And then there was a small Weinstein company that began called Radius, and they did some of their product day and date. So I've been around day and date a long, long time, and I can tell you that my belief is you still need theatrical. With Universal, they got caught. I mean, they'd already had campaigns going. They already had their marketing going. They had a lot of money into this film. I don't know what their alternative was. If they pulled it, they would have had to start their whole marketing process again. But I think there's unintended consequences out of this. Everyone's writing about, well, the studios are going to love this, and the windows are going to break. I kind of think it may, again, I don't know, but it may actually go the other way, because I think the studios on these bigger films are going to realize that the theatrical that they lose will not be made up in streaming. And you need theatrical. You need theatrical to market the film to the next level, to the level after that. Without that, we're in a situation like we're in now, where there's plenty of content out there, but no one knows what to watch. Your friend will call you and say, yeah, I'm watching Ozark, and so you're okay, or I'm watching Unorthodox, or but it's really hard to get through all that. And so you're starting to see articles like, these are the top 10. But you are not going to make up for a $250 million theatrical box office by going day and date or going straight to streaming. Just not going to happen.
The one thing that I found really interesting about Trolls, which, I mean, if we assume that The Hunt and Invisible Man were inevitably switched over to streaming because they had just come out, but Trolls is really the case study to pay attention to, because it's a much bigger family film and its release came after the theaters were closed. What I'm curious about is, they're only charging something like $20. But if you took a family to see that movie in a theater, you'd be spending X amount of dollars, based on how many people are there. But if you do it in your home and you've got 4 kids and a spouse, that $20 suddenly gets stretched quite far. And I'm curious to know if you think that that's sustainable for the distributor, given that they would lose all that extra revenue that they would have gotten from having the public take people to the theater.
Well, I think there's definitely a loss of revenue. Matter of fact, Universal's gotten quite a bit of criticism about even the $20, because that $20, you don't own it, it expires. But no one's pretending that the experience at home is the same as at a theater. It's a completely different experience. I mean, when the lights go down and the movie starts, it's like racing a whiteboard. You're starting a whole new journey that you're not sure where you're going to go. That doesn't happen at home. At home, you hit pause, you get up, there's noise, the phone rings. I mean, all those things don't happen in the theater, and the theater is an immersive medium, and being at home is not immersive. So to me, there's a big difference.
But there's also sort of the flip side of that dollar amount, being that families who maybe wouldn't splurge the $80 to take their whole family might be willing to spend the $20. So I'm curious if there's been tracking on the revenue generated by Trolls.
Well, they're not reporting it, so which tells me if it was the best thing that ever happened to Comcast, who's the one pulling the strings for Universal, we'd know about it. So I caution the optimism of, the streaming is the this is the end all now.
I'm also curious to know if you can comment at all about the relationship between the theaters and I guess the real estate owners, because there's obviously space occupied on land that gets leased, and how generous is that relationship right now? Are theaters? I mean, I don't know if beyond your own company how much there's a certain squeezing of rent payments, but it seems like theaters not earning revenue on land and still paying rent could be really harmful to some companies that aren't particularly well planned for it.
Well, I don't think anyone planned for this. No one's seen this before. But it's a good question. And let me just preface the answer by explaining that most theaters in the United States are on leases. They're not the exhibition company does not own the property and rent the theaters to themselves or pay no rent. So, I mean, I don't know what the percentage would be, but it's going to be in the 98% world that all theaters are leases. So the relationship between the landlord, the landlord of the property, is going to be very important going forward, not just with theaters, but with restaurants and with everyone else who's closed and is not producing rent. And I think the landlords are, I think it's a little early right now to know. I actually know that it's a little early right now to know what the landlord's positions are going to be, because they don't know yet, and I don't blame them for not knowing, because we're in such uncertainty, and I hate going back to that, but frankly, that's where we are. So conversations are going to occur between the landlord and the retail establishment. In case what we're talking about is theater operators. And, there's going to have to be some, give and take as far as paying rent, being rent relief, pushing the leases back. Let's just make it up, not paying rent for 3 months, but we'll extend the lease 3 months, and, things like that. But I will bet that there'll be a lot of theaters that don't make it through this. So we're sitting somewhere between 38,000 screens and 40,000. 38,000 to 40,000 screens right now in the U.S. And I am pretty sure that a lot of those screens, I don't have a percentage, but a lot of those screens won't make it through this. There's probably been a need to write the amount of theaters for quite a while, which hasn't happened, but this will make sure it happens. So if a company files Chapter 11, for instance, they'll have the ability to shed some of the properties. I expect that there will be some filings, so the companies can restructure, and that's what a Chapter 11 allows you to do, is restructure. And I think that the theaters will just circuits will be smaller. Releases are going to be smaller. Distribution is going to change. I don't think there's going to be a 4,500 theater release of the next Marvel film. It's not going to be 4,500 theaters. There's not going to be 4,500 theaters to release it on. That's not a bad thing, because right now, then I'll just say if it was 3,000 theaters, the box office would not change. So statistically, it just that's the way it works. So in the world of distribution, everyone likes to run around saying, hey, I got a whole lot of theaters. I got 4,500 theaters. I got 3,600 theaters. But that really doesn't guarantee a bigger gross at all. So,
but does
that will change.
Does that necessarily mean that a huge tentpole film gets a smaller percentage of screens? Because if there are fewer theaters and fewer screens, isn't there a world in which an Avengers movie could just take over an entire theater's screens? I mean, it seems like
it could, but there's other distributors in the marketplace, and if Avengers is being released by Disney, and how are you going to tell 20th Century Fox? I mean, well, not Fox now,
it's
but
all Disney.
You're not going to tell Warner Brothers that you're not going to open Batman. So there'll still be there'll be enough theaters to take care of the releases. So because it'll be fewer, it doesn't mean it will injure the box office or at all, because I don't think it will. Just so you understand that in an opening weekend of a movie, a commercial movie, wide movie, 50% of the box office is achieved on 500 theaters. 90% is achieved in somewhere around 1,800 theaters, and it fluctuates a little depending if it's the film that plays to all 4 quadrants. So given that number, and that number for a run of engagement, in other words, not just opening weekend, but the entire, is still 2,500 or less. So at 2,500, you have saturated the market and will maximize the box office.
I personally, as someone who absolutely lives and breathes going to the movie theater, I was really getting fed up with going to see a big new release on opening weekend and finding the theater half empty because it's playing on so many screens. I want that theater to be packed. And since you can buy, your ticket online and get a reserved seat, so you're not necessarily gambling by going out to the theater and seeing if you can get in, is there something to be gained by having fuller theaters? I mean, fewer screens.
I agree with you, Alex. I think it's a better experience when it's full, and I think that's what will happen. Again, you're not going to be turning away people. You just won't have on opening weekend, 30 show times in a day. It's just not going to happen. Assuming there's enough product in the marketplace, which will fluctuate up and down depending on the time of year and as this all flushes out, all these release schedules, which are now getting pushed and pushed. And then production shutting down. So what does that mean for 2022? 2021 probably going to be okay because some of this product's going to move into 2021, but 2022 on it kind of a little bit of a mini writer's strike, where we had some gaps because the films weren't being produced. So I think it'll go up and down for a while.
How do you see the current reliance on streaming platforms, particularly Netflix right now, where it was already a big disruptor in terms of how people watched content? Now it's, how almost everyone's watching content.
Their stock today. I hope you all bought stock in Netflix, a week ago, because today's the highest it has ever been.
Wow.
I look at streaming services not as a disruptor to theatrical. I never have, just like I did not look at DVDs when they came out or Blu-rays when they came out as disruptors. I looked at them as additional pieces of education or films that you could get, and which just create the desire to see more films. So I'm not a believer in that. And the biggest year that domestic box office ever seen is 2018, and Netflix existed in 2018, and Amazon existed in 2018. So we certainly can live side by side, and I think that we complement each other.
Well, you had brokered the deal with Netflix to play Netflix films at Landmark, but they won't play Netflix films at AMC. So I'm curious to know if with this potential slowdown in product being delivered, I guess, into 2022, will Netflix be able to find its way into major commercial nationwide cinemas?
I think there's certainly a possibility of that. There's going to be, if you're running a 30-plex, your AMC, you're running a 30-plex, your Cinemark running a 30-plex, there's a lot of mouths to feed. So I think the potential's there. I think Netflix has moved, over the last 2 years or year and a half, I guess now, has moved and has created some windows for their bigger product. So there'll probably be some give and take on the three major chains attitude, and some give and take on the Netflix attitude or position. So.
Well, when we do reopen, I'm curious.
Thank you for saying it that way.
Oh,
because we will.
When we reopen, there's a certain. I think obviously there's going to continue to be a very gradual psychological shedding of the stay-at-home social distancing, and that might affect, in particular, older viewers who are traditionally seen as very loyal theater goers. And I think that, art house theaters in particular often have a solid, loyal customer base from older patrons. And I'm curious to know how that might be different between Landmark and ArcLight, because, ArcLight seems to be the sort of hip, edgy one, and that the Landmark seems to be the very sophisticated. I mean, they're both, these things are certainly mutual, but Landmark is the one, at least that I used to go to all the time on Pico, was definitely sort of like the sophisticated art house for older patrons, whereas feel like the demographic for the ArcLight is younger. So tell me, first of all, if you in any way agree with that, or if that's way off base, because
No, I do agree with that. The Landmark constituent is generally older, empty nester or above, um, and is loyal. I mean, they go to the movies more frequently than um, probably any other kind of business, meaning any other, an AMC or even an ArcLight. It's a pretty frequent moviegoer. I agree with that audience will probably be a little bit slower going back. As much as they will desire to, I think they'll be a little bit freaked out. So I think that's a challenge. But talking about the art houses and just not Landmark, I think art houses are in a really good position to survive because of their sizes. They're not going to, I referred to a 30-plex a while ago. There's not an art house that is a 30-plex. So the Landmarks, I think the most amount of screens a Landmark theater has is 12. And that's a lot for Landmark. So they don't need the amount of product. Theaters like that will not need the amount of product that you will need to fill a megaplex. So I think it's a different challenge. You have the problem with the audience being older, but the property being, this might work better, or, on the commercial side, I have a 21-plex or, a 30-plex, and I need to fill that. But my customer might want to come back sooner. I don't know. But so it's a contradiction, but it's, it's at the end of the day, it's a big challenge.
Well, speaking of, the amount of screens, I noticed that the Alamo that opened up in downtown, they opened up a lot of screens, but they also have a lot of repertory programming, and that complements their first runs. And I know that the ArcLight does a lot of that too. And we've certainly seen other theaters take on things like the Met Opera, and things that are considerably different from what you think of as like the first release of a new movie. And I'm curious if you guys are planning to potentially expand that a bit, if the programming has to be tailored around the fact that fewer films are coming out.
There's no question. I mean, we're looking at a lot of that. The studios are also looking at it and opening up their vaults and trying to figure out, what they'll give exhibition access to and for what cost, so that, we start rebuilding an audience and rebuilding a confidence to come back to the movie theaters.
So let's backtrack a little bit and talk about some of the issues that predate the current calamity. I was particularly interested to talk to you about how various theater chains are moving to subscription services, and I'm curious to know what your thoughts are. It started out small, but when AMC and Regal take it on, that suddenly becomes a really big deal, I think, because of its potential to lure people away from a variety of theaters and consolidate it as brand loyalty to one chain. So I'm just curious to know what your thoughts are with that going on. If it seems in any way like it's working for them, if it's something that you would ever explore with ArcLight, or how you think that affects attendance, given the fact that if someone subscribes, they're more likely to go to the theater that they subscribe to.
Well, let's back up. Before we talk about the future, let's talk about the past. So MoviePass was a disruptor. They came in, got a lot of attention, took a while because they actually started in 2013, but it took a while. And what my conclusions are different than what has been written. What's been written is that, and most of this put out the propaganda put out by MoviePass was, the MoviePass patrons spend more money at the concessions. They do this, they do that. Well, I found none of that to be true, and my fear, and to the point where, well, someone's going to go to the movies more. My numbers told me that the business went up 4%. So you say, well, that's why is that? Because MoviePass is putting out numbers. There's 20% of tickets sold in a given weekend, 30% of tickets sold. Well, in some cases that was true, but what happened is that the person, and I'm just going to use $15 as a LA top ticket price. So the person who was paying $15 decides, and was going to the movies, a lot, decides, hey, I'm not going to spend $15 anymore. I'm going to spend $10, especially when MoviePass went to the $10. And I can go as much as I want in a given month. And that's what they did. So they moved the person who was paying $15 and made them a subscriber. The additional revenue that came out, again, I came out with 4%. Someone else, another company I know that did the same analysis, they came up with 5%. So I think we're in the ball game. So, and what I also know from firsthand is that the MoviePass folks did not buy any concessions, 0. So there was not an increase in concessions. So this 4% who came didn't buy concessions. I will tell you, they spread out the show times a little more. They came to later sets than other folks. So that was a plus. But and so now what happened? Now that MoviePass has collapsed because it was not a sustainable model, and so do those people want to come back to paying $15? And I think they don't. So AMC does, or Regal, or whoever at Cinemark, have all gone into the membership subscription model. They're going to try it out, and I don't know if they're successful with it. We don't have enough numbers to even to figure that out yet, and especially now with this, it's going to be quite some time till we figure that out. But yes, everybody credits Netflix for being a disruptor. I don't think Netflix is a disruptor. I do think MoviePass is a disruptor.
I mean, I'm asking because I would kill for ArcLight to have one so I can cancel my A-list. But
if you can figure out for me how we can make money on that, the studio, because the studio has to play along too.
Yeah.
So the studio has to make money, the exhibition has to make money, and not at the expense of we're going to lose, we're losing patrons. So I don't think anyone's come up with that yet. And I mean, certainly when and if one of us, two of us, all of us do, then it'll be great. But right now, I don't think that tale's been told.
Well, I think you just have to make it more expensive, because the truth is, I have 10 different streaming services, but the one that I pay the most for, HBO, provides like the gold standard of television. So it's for me, it would be similar with ArcLight. I would pay more for that subscription than I would for a different theater because of ArcLight being the gold standard of exhibition. And I mean, I don't know what that number is, but someone who,
well, listen, we're looking at it, and we're discussing it, and we're probably will test it somewhere and do those kind of things. But I thank you, but the MoviePass did not get the volume until they dropped to $10. So remember, they were up at $30, they were up at $40 at one point, and nothing. So it's an interesting exercise, to say the least.
Well, let's talk about other ways that theaters in contemporary exhibition have attempted to generate revenue or maintain a foothold with their customers by adding value to the exhibition experience, which, because we live in LA, that might mean something like making sure that a new release at the ArcLight or at the Landmark has a Q&A with the filmmakers or the cast. But on a national scale might mean adding a bar, dining experience, making the concessions a little bit more premium. Let's start with I guess the concept of, if you're a cinephile in Los Angeles and you go out on a Friday night for an exciting new movie, especially an exclusive, at this point you pretty much expect that your ticket is going to give you a movie star or a film director coming in to talk about it afterwards. What's your philosophy on all of that?
Well, I mean, it's a great marketing tool. You know, the films that do that are usually the independent films, and the films that need all the help they can, and the films that don't have a $50 million P&A campaign behind it. So when we generated the kind of grosses that Q&As help, because you know, for the most part, a Q&A gets announced, it gets sold out. So that's a, you know, guarantee for the right folks, a sellout, and, you know, and more box office, which would then get reported. And it's a marketing tool, and it's become pretty standard in Los Angeles, New York as well, but, you know, Los Angeles was really the I wouldn't say it started here, but it really did on a wider scale, meaning the Landmark and ArcLight. So I mean, I did my first Q&A on a film called Shaker Heights, you know, that was Shia LaBeouf's one of his first films, and it was a huge deal because it was part of the HBO series Project Greenlight.
Oh yeah.
And it was the result of that, and it was a pretty controversial film from the standpoint is you were watching this show and you hated these two directors, and I mean, it was just great. And so people just wanted to come out and see that. And I thought it was one of the, you know, we had done smaller Q&As before, but to me, that was the first time it just knocked this little tiny film into, you know, wow, you know, we can do something with this.
Obviously, we're in a city that makes a Q&A like that possible on a regular basis, but have you found any kind of lessons from that you've been able to translate, whether at Landmark? I mean, well, I guess we'll talk specifically about your time at Landmark here, because you haven't really had a chance to do much of this yet. How do you deal with that on a national level? Are there markets where you found other solutions to the in-person live Q&A?
Well, actually, it's ArcLight's been pretty active in that, and have recorded a lot of Q&As, and have attached them to films when they played in Chicago or in Boston. And so you have the opportunity to see that Q&A after the film on screen. We were very early, so I don't have any results on that yet. At Landmark, we just left everything online, so you could go online and watch the Q&A if you so wanted to. So, but I will tell you that the viewership on that very, very low, is people just really want to be there in person. So and we experimented a little bit with like some Skype type of Q&As, you know, but not a, you know, it's like, you know, you didn't decide after that, oh, we just figured it out. It just didn't happen that way. So
I mean, all Q&As will be done online for the next couple of months at least,
including this one.
Yeah. Let's talk about bars. That's become a premium offering that, you know, it's not obviously a brand new idea. There was always a draft house here and there. I remember one in Bethesda, I think, actually growing up. But how valuable is that in terms of, I mean, there's obviously a very nice one at the Landmark, and there's a couple of bars at the ArcLight in Hollywood. Do you find that increases the sort of patron experience? Does it bring in the same kind of, I guess, revenue that, say, selling normal concessions would? I mean, do people now expect it if they're of a certain income bracket or demographic, or you know, their city patrons who want to make a whole night out of it? How has that affected the movie-going experience for you?
Well, I've found that you know, you wouldn't open a theater without it now. And you know, initially we weren't slow to want to do it. The ABC laws, especially in California, were slow to let us do it. And New York was right behind that, because I opened a theater in New York 2 years ago. It still wasn't allowed to, you weren't allowed to bring alcohol, even though I had a beautiful bar, into the auditoriums. That's now has been relaxed, or we figured a workaround on that. But so we always wanted to get into that business, and thought it was, a real smart idea. And it just, it's, if you want a glass of wine or you want a Coke, I mean, you should be able to have either of those things and bring either of those into the theaters. So you have some people like to get there early and have a drink, and take their time. Other people, because of reserved seating, like to get there right at showtime, and but don't miss the trailers. So they'll walk in at showtime, and so you have a I think you're serving just two different, or multiple audiences and multiple desires. But the bars have gotten better because the laws have relaxed, and and that goes for all over now. Back in the day, I mean, Alamo is able to exist because I don't think Texas had laws. I mean, I don't still think they do, but so I mean, long ago, I mean, a theater that did become a landmark theater that opened, I don't know what year, 2000, 2001, had a full bar at that time down in Dallas. So, and I actually was working for ArcLight, and I went down to Dallas and looked at the theater, and I was trying to figure out how to use that in California and figure that out. But exhibition and NATO California, which is National Association of Theater Owners, really helped with the lobbying effect, lobbying Sacramento to relax their stance. Because our position was, what are you doing? I mean, why can't you? I can go to Dodger Stadium, and not everyone has to be 21 years old and have a beer. And so, it just was a weird, archaic law that restricted movie theaters. But it's just an add-on, and I think it's just part of the amenity and part of the growth of exhibition. A lot of times we're characterized as being very, very mature, and we haven't changed much. But in fact, we've remade ourselves about every 10 years, with either it's and this stadium seating back in the end of the 90s, and then to bars started going in the 2000s, and to this day, the seating's changed, and reserve seating, and so I think the industry keeps evolving, just like we will evolve, after this virus is over.
And tell me your thoughts on the dine-in experience, because I personally happen to really like the Alamo setup, and also their menu and pricing. But of course, they're not the only game in town. You can do stuff like that at the iPic, some AMCs. At the iPic, I think they even have an usher that continues to bring you popcorn throughout the film. And their ticket prices are, of course, much higher. But yeah, how do you feel about that, having done this?
Well, personally, I'm not a dining person, so I don't want the distraction. I mean, I hate it when someone gets up in the middle of a movie and goes to the restroom, frankly. I mean, I don't want to come out of the movie. So I think Alamo does the best job as far as not taking you out of the movie, but you're still taken out of the movie. Other dine-ins I don't think do as well, but it's not my thing. But there's an audience that likes that, and and I find iPic, for instance, I used to call it an anniversary theater. You'd go there on your birthday, you go there on your wedding anniversary. But were you going to go there 3 times a month? Probably not. So, but not my thing. But Alamo's a different vibe, and and I appreciate that. It's just not my thing.
One other thing I wanted to hit on was how many different ways you can see a film now. There's obviously the standard DCP projection, but you've also got 3D. You've got the ArcLight. Anytime I see something that's on 70 millimeter, I'll go see it. There's IMAX. There's now 4DX. I don't even really know what that is. There's some films that get a special 35 millimeter run, which is of course quite complicated for the exhibitors to bring back the projectors if they didn't have them. So
it's not the projectors that are the problems. It's getting someone to run them.
Ah.
That's the bigger issue. There's plenty of 35 millimeter projectors around. Landmark, I left one in every city. The problem is you don't have the skill's gone.
Mm-hmm.
So
I mean, new theaters are building these booths that are so small that I don't even know if you
no
can
booths.
projector. Yeah, I mean it's
no booths anymore. You build theaters now that are it's like an elevator lift that the projector goes into, the digital projector, and it raises up into the sky. And so there's I haven't built the last 3 theaters I built do not have booths. Wow.
Well, let's actually talk about that portion of things before we take some questions from the audience. But one of the great things about the expansion of Landmark for me as a film goer is that I come from DC, and you guys opened some amazing theaters in DC. So tell us, I guess, about how you evaluate where a new theater should go in terms of the real estate, the actual design, the patrons in that neighborhood, how it may or may not conflict with other theaters in the geographic area, and then give us a case study of one that you're particularly proud of.
Well, unfortunately, probably, you're going to be the only one who relates to this in this conversation, but you look for emerging areas. DC had several emerging areas over the years, including downtown, which even though I'm not from DC, I spent a lot of time there growing up. And downtown, you didn't go downtown. I mean, it just was really, really dangerous place. I mean, even if you went to the FBI tour, you made sure your mother was picking you up, and you weren't going to hang around on the street. So DC was a place that evolved, and Alex, I think you were in Georgetown, which was always safe and always nice, but the rest of the city was not so much. Rest of the district. So. Northwest side, of course, you had the Uptown Theater, but as my last build in DC was in an area called the Shaw District, and the Shaw District was an emerging neighborhood. It hadn't emerged yet when I made the deal there, and it was pretty scary. A lot of drug dealers, a lot of crime, a lot of homeless, a lot of bad stuff. And but it was, to me, it was going to be the next market to be able to go into and capture. And in this case, we were building a Landmark, which, as we discussed earlier, was, Landmark is generally known as an older audience, but the Shaw District to me was not about an older audience. It was about 20-somethings with money. Mm-hmm. The great thing about DC is people have income. It's the government, so it's kind of guaranteed. So the Shaw District was going to be, 20s with money, and so what I did there is built a bar. And I added 6 theaters to that bar, but I built a bar primarily, so that was the focus. That it was a cool place to go. It was going to be the place to go. It was next to a live venue, which is probably the best live venue in DC. So you had this the 9:30 back and forth. Yes, exactly. And the 9:30 club, you're standing in line for an hour and a half before you get in, and where are you going to go? Next door and have a drink. So that was the primary thinking about that. And so every market's different, and different thought has to go into it. And so, not every facility, that I have built over the years look the same or, serve the same people.
It's funny, I was walking down in the Shaw area over Thanksgiving, and I stumbled upon a West Elm, and that's when I knew this is not the neighborhood I grew up with. So let's go ahead and get some audience questions. There's some other things I might throw in throughout, but I do want to say that if anyone has a question, you can go and raise your hand, and I'll call on you and then unmute you. And yeah, so okay, well, Brando, since you've got, well, I didn't literally mean it. There's a function in Zoom for you to digitally raise your hand, but since you're already there, I'm gonna unmute you and we'll start with you. So take it away.
Thank you so much. I was wondering, you briefly mentioned about elderly patrons coming. I myself has asthma, and I've been thinking a lot in regards to the difference between when the country is going to open up and allow movie theaters to open, different from when people are actually going to feel safe enough to go in a theater. And I was wondering if that's partially a conversation you guys have had in regards to, you know, creating, as Alex mentioned, that environment of safety and great emotional experience that is going in a theater without having to worry about, you know, the medical part of it.
Yes, thank you for the question. We were talking about this before the shutdown, and we had already started and had gone to social distancing within the auditoriums. So you were not going to be able to buy, you wouldn't be seated next to someone who you didn't know. So you could go as a couple, for instance, and that would be fine. And so we actually started implementing that across the board, but I think we ran about 3 days. Plus we had, you know, accelerated our cleaning procedures. We had changed to a hospital grade cleaning solution, those kind of things. So as we emerge out, we will reinstate those, and we will also increase that as need be. And then, you know, and as the confidence returns, and as, you know, we're not getting another, you know, round of COVID or whatever the next virus is, you know, then I think we'll return to some sort of normalcy. But you know, opening up will be very, very soft, and I think that there'll be, you know, just not ArcLight, but everybody will go to procedures such as I just described.
But if opening is going to be soft, what content are you going to be given? Because
well, that goes back to what we were talking about earlier. I mean, the studios are going to open up some of their vaults, and, you know, we'll probably be playing some rep. You know, you'll probably be pretty tired of rep by the time that rolls around, but you know, there'll be a period where we just want to get people in the theater, you know, and create that community again that we were enjoying before this shut us down. So it's going to be, it's not going to happen overnight.
You should get the Disney animated classics, because they've kept those off of screens for way too long.
My bet is Disney be the last one to give us that.
All right, let's go to Alyssa. Let me unmute you, and feel free to turn on your video.
Hey, thanks for coming. My question is about like accessibility for more middle America kind of states, and how they can actually reach seeing those screens and getting into the theater, how exhibitors have maybe potentially thought about like accessing that part of the market, with the potential of allowing their films to be available online to those specific groups. And now specifically that COVID-19 is happening, it seems like those theaters might be closing and make it even more difficult for that population to watch new release films. That was just something I was curious about.
I agree with you. You know, I think some of the outlying theaters will be some of the first to close. And so in order to, you know, still keep that audience engaged, you know, there's going to have to be a shift, whether it's, you know, a shortening of the windows like we've discussed. I don't think on a major release that streaming will be available on a day and date basis. I still believe that the major companies will not agree to that, but a shortening of the 90-day window to say 45 days, that could be something that happens.
All right, thank you. Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Let's go to Mark. Oh, sorry. Hang on, Mark.
Sorry, I just need to get some light on.
All right. Ted, I'm a big fan of the ArcLight here in Boston, where I've been going since your soft opening. And I work right next door to there at the Museum of Science, where we have an OmniMax screen, which is undergoing renovation and is closed now. So I have a question for you about 3 venue categories. I've been working in movie theaters since 1980 when I was a projectionist. But so one is about these venues like OmniMax theaters, real specialty ones. And Alex kind of touched on that with 70 in that. The other is the last movie I saw before they after they closed the theaters in LA, but before they closed everything, was the drive-in. And we went to the Vine Drive-In out in City of Industry, had a great time, very socially distanced. And there was an article in the Times about them coming back, and then they closed them too. So I have a question about those 2. And then if Alex would have a chance to talk about his venue of screenings, because Alex runs these amazing screenings with Q&A and everything at USC, and I'm just curious about that.
Okay. Well, first of all, thank you for being, one of our patrons in Boston. And you're right, it's been a soft opening, so we got a lot of work to do there. You mentioned drive-ins. Just a little secret, they're still operating. Now, the Vineland Drive-In is not because of the county order. We did not close the Vineland Drive-In when we were ordered to close the indoors, because we felt, made no sense, but LA County has closed this. But you can go to San Bernardino, Riverside, San Diego County. The #1 gross last weekend, I think, it wasn't Trolls, but it was something, was a drive-in in Sacramento. So there's to my knowledge, there's about 34 drive-ins still operating. And I also believe that drive-ins will come back. I mean, not permanently, but I think we'll start going to the movies again via the drive-in. And I think there'll be, and we're working on some things, there'll be some pop-up drive-ins. So I think that will be something that is definitely going to happen, and will happen nationally. So, but anyway, that's a fun question. And yeah, I think it's a shame they closed the drive-ins.
And I have to say, I wanted to go to one of the drive-ins, maybe the one in San Bernardino, but the programming, unfortunately, was just the same 6 to 8 films that were playing a month ago, and I'd seen the ones I wanted to see.
Right.
So it would be nice if there was a bit more repertory worked in there.
Do you like the drive-ins, Alex? Have you been to a drive-in? I wonder if you've
been to Vineland. Yeah, I mean. Yeah. You telling me that people wouldn't go to see E.T. in the drive-in right now? Like, I
saw Onward and Sonic the Hedgehog. It was $10 for 2 of us. That's a pretty good value too.
No, but you're right. I mean, they're still playing the same stuff. So I mean, if the film buyers were creative, they would go out and start putting E.T. in or whatever, or 3 episodes of Ozark, anything, right? So I think people would definitely, just to get out of the house. I mean, it's a big deal right now that, geez, I get to go to the grocery store this week. So
Ted, do you have a cut of the drive-ins there? You just said you close them. Are you part of the Vine?
The Vineland Drive-In is a Pacific Theater, yes.
Oh, okay.
Just a little history here. Pacific Theaters, up until, I'm making this up, but 1995, 1998 was the largest drive-in operator in the world.
Wow. And so, Alex, how about your screenings? When do you think we're going to see some of your excellent programming back in Norris?
I have absolutely no way of commenting on that because, I haven't even heard rumors. So the first and foremost, obviously the first and foremost thing for us is to maintain a continuity for our students' educations, and then we'll take it all from there. But I will say this, I've gotten to do some really cool things through Zoom, and
Absolutely.
it has had a nice added benefit of being able to allow our alumni who aren't local to enjoy some things. Yeah,
That's
exactly.
me from Boston.
So I think that whenever, let's, even if we were at some future date, right back to where we had been before any of this happened, I would love to fold in more things like this that that people could really enjoy no matter where they are and how they feel about going out. That said, you know, I'm of course going to follow every guideline that we get from the city, the state, the university, but it's also going to be about what I'm being offered, you know, quite frankly. So
Thank you both.
yeah,
And Mark, if there's something you think that we should be doing in Boston that we're not, you know, please feel free to send me an email.
Oh, well, yeah, if you can send me in the chat there your email, I have plenty of things I could say about. I go to the movies a lot in Boston.
Okay.
All right, we're gonna go to Michael.
Hey, thanks for doing this. My question is more regarding. I've got young kids, and we go to the theaters quite a bit in ArcLight's. Where we go. Hang on a second. I'm managing 3 kids right now, but I'm curious. You know, how much have you guys spent looking at dynamic pricing particularly during daytimes when, you know, it's very family friendly to take kids during the day, but still paying the same premium as going at, you know, 8 p.m. on a Saturday night?
Well, I think ArcLight or Pacific was probably the first company, and they started doing it right about the time I was leaving the company, that did what we call tilt pricing. So, you know, it was more expensive on a Friday night or a Saturday night. To your point, I think we do have to look closer, and this will give us the opportunity to do that on the matinee side, as you suggested. And I think there's some work to be done there along the lines that you're suggesting.
All right, let's go to Iram.
Hi.
Hey.
Hi, Ted. Thank you so much for your time. So I was one of the filmmakers in competition at South by Southwest. So not only have we lost our premiere, but even sales, it's been very challenging because sales companies like Oscilloscope will say, oh, well, we're interested, but, you know, we can't really make a decision. So, and also this conversation of potentially a second wave in the fall. Even if we were getting some sort of digital distribution, the idea in another world would have been to maybe sort of do a theatrical ourselves, you know, 4-wall, or do something at a Lemley. So with a soft open for a theater chain like ArcLight, are there potentials for independent filmmakers to say, you know, if instead of going to a vault with Disney or Warner Brothers?
I love this question, and I would have paid you $5 to ask it because I'd actually forgotten about this. When South by Southwest canceled, a guy named Rob Lurie, who's a director, wrote an article, and I picked up on it, and I hadn't talked to Rob in 15 years. And I contacted Rob and said, what do you think about me going to all the agencies, and we'll get these films out into the marketplace, not on a release basis, but on a screening basis, like it would be a film festival. We'll do a virtual South by Southwest film festival. Rob said, I think it'd be a great idea. I can't give you my film because I've already made a deal to take out a different way. So I said, appreciate that, but I just want you to know you inspired me to do this. And so I talked to all the agencies, you know, CAA, Endeavor, all of them, and everybody was on board to some degree or another, meaning that they couldn't commit because they got to talk to the filmmakers, and they, you know, had some deals. And then we got shut down. So that went nowhere. On the other side coming out of this, absolutely, and I would be totally willing and excited about doing something along those lines that, number one, doesn't hurt your distribution, period. Now, if you want to go out for regular release, that's fine, but you might just want to get noticed and get, like you do at a film festival, which is, you know, a great marketing tool. So yes, I would be totally open to that. And I think it's a great idea.
But I mean selling tickets too. I mean like sort of four-walling. Would ArcLight would be open with that?
Why would you want a four wall if we'll sell tickets for you?
Sorry, yes. Wrong use of word, but it's just like per theater.
Yeah,
Okay.
I'd be open for a rev share. That's fine, because it's not that the rev share is important.
Right.
But first of all, I don't think there's a whole lot of people who can afford to four wall. So
Yeah.
on the independent side. So yes, I think there's a huge opportunity there, and thank you for bringing this up.
Thank you so much. Thanks for saying that. That gives me hope.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, let's go to Jeffrey.
Hi. Thank you, Mr. Mundorff, for having us today. It's been such a pleasure.
Thank you, Jeff, for showing up at 7 o'clock at night. Thank you.
Well, it's really informative. And I was really curious, in terms of alternate use of your theater space, have you guys ever considered having like a cafe that could compete with places like Starbucks, so you could have sort of ongoing revenue throughout the day? And then also, like, if you go to Korea, you go to CGV over there, they actually have a film library, which creates a sort of community space for people to go during the day, and then they end up seeing a movie because they're utilizing that space. So I was wondering what alternate ways you've seen the use of the theaters.
Well, if you go to Hollywood and you're sitting outside the Dome, that cafe exists. So, and it's a third party. We don't run it, and they have a nice little business there. So, yeah, it is something we're continuing to look at and explore. Not quite sure how to handle the DVD side of that, but I think that where most of ArcLight theaters have a retail area. I think there's certainly things we should be improving there.
Okay, let's go to Gianluca.
Okay, well, thank you very much for your presence here. And I do have a two-part question, actually two different questions. And the first one is, do you think ticket prices will be impacted, getting either more expensive or cheaper? And the second one would be being an ArcLight member myself and attending the monthly screenings, because we get 2 tickets for the ArcLight Present series. And I wonder if there's a survey for picking what kind of movies will be presented in this series. And if ArcLight ever considers screening classic movies more often, or if that is just something that doesn't work with the audience.
Well, it's an interesting question. If you're in Wichita, you don't have any competition for classic movies. In Los Angeles, it's a whole different thing. You have the Egyptian playing classic movies that is right up the street from the ArcLight Hollywood. You have UCLA, sorry to say those words. You have USC, you have the Hammer, there is not a short of classic films. So it gets pretty diluted. So not quite sure how I answer that. And then on the genre side, you'll have, the New Art Theater in West Los Angeles playing, some bringbacks, almost like a Criterion collection, and so there's in the Arrow in Santa Monica as well. So there's plenty of availability there. So I'm not sure how much of a business model for a for-profit theater is viable. I haven't seen where it really is. Now, it doesn't mean that we won't play some things, and because we will, as we've talked about. We're going to need content as this soft opening occurs. And what was your other question?
First of all, that was a great answer. It actually touched a lot on what I was wondering. And the other question was, do you think will ticket prices be impacted?
Well, it goes back to our conversation about subscription. If we figure out a way to do subscription, then obviously it'll get cheaper. Do I think it's going to get more expensive? No, I absolutely don't. I think that would be the worst move that the exhibition industry could do, is to raise prices. I think that maybe even on a non-subscription basis for, for a while, that they certainly need to give some incentive to come out that's better than just a full price, $15 ticket.
Wonderful. That was very insightful, and thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, we have 3 more questions, and I think that that's probably going to be good for us to wrap up for the night, because I don't want to keep you too late. But we'll go to Phil, then Jonathan, then Jason. So let's start with Phil.
Thanks, Ted, for joining us. Thanks, Alex, for doing this. My question is, I guess, pretty relevant, sort of just the general theme of the Q&A. But one's film going experience is something that can be it's something that you can get attached to pretty easily. And you'd mentioned before that you were an usher, so you've obviously been in theaters for a really long time, and there might be a pretty good connection between your role as an usher and my question, because I can see you in the back of the house oh wow, we really could be doing a lot of this stuff better. But my question is have you always been someone who's been forward looking and excited for change, or did it sort of take you a while to were you forced to get used to it, and did it take you a while to adapt and say, okay, we have to I guess swim or die?
Well, that's a great question, but I'm I'm not gonna be able to answer it maybe the way you expect.
That's all right.
Most of my career, from the time I left operations, which was a long time ago, I was what's called a film buyer. So I was the guy choosing movies. So I wasn't the one building movie theaters or coming up with any kind of creative ideas on that. I was just trying to get the best product in a very competitive world, especially in the days when I was a film buyer. It was very, very competitive. In 1999, I went back into operations we had some personnel issues, and so I was able to enter the world of operations in this century, if you will, because a long time ago, buildings weren't the same, the hiring practices weren't the same. I mean, it was just a different world. But it was, so I spent 1 year as co-head of California operations, and I learned a lot. And so when I went to Landmark 4 years later, I had then thought about a lot of things that I thought we could do better and implement. And so and then I became chief operating officer. So I originally went over to Landmark as film buyers, frankly, and then I evolved into the operations side, took on that. So that gave me the opportunity to be innovative in that world. Whether would have been innovative if I'd been in operations before, I don't know that. So, but it's a great question for me to think about.
Yeah, sure.
All right, let's go to Jonathan.
Hi, I was wondering, how you think, obviously, this huge disruption in people going to theaters in general, and obviously less money probably being invested into the film industry is going to ripple not only short term but long term in the industry as a whole.
I don't think that less money is going to go in the industry. I think money will continue to pour in the industry. I mean, when you have a company like Netflix, that had a $13 billion production budget, I mean, there's been no time in history that had so much production going on, so many people in work. It's just this was this is a little deflection for a while, but content is king, and I'm assuming that's what you want to be involved in. And so you have a great future, because there's going to be lots of content needed. Now, whether it goes out in 90 days or goes out straight streaming or whatever, that's just something that will evolve, but the content is needed. So I'm very, very bullish on the production side and the overall industry as a healthy business.
Thank you.
Great. And let's go to Jason.
Hey, thanks, Alex. Ted, thanks for doing this. Question.
Oh, you just got, hang on a sec. Jason, I'm gonna unmute you.
By the way, Jonathan had a hell of an aquarium back there, so one big fish.
Jason, we should have you back.
Yeah.
Okay.
Hey, how are you? Thanks for doing this, and thanks, Alex, for hosting this.
You bet.
Ted, question for you in regards to the fall movie going season. Assuming that everything is getting back to normal, with a bunch of the studio films having pushed, obviously some into the fall, some into next year, and then you've got your fall film season, which obviously always consists of a lot of awards type films and contenders and films out of Sundance, and hopefully there'll be Toronto to launch some of those films. It seems to me like you're going to have a much more condensed period of time with a lot of independent or awards type movies that don't have the same P&A budgets as some of these bigger studio films, competing for people's eyes and in terms of building traction up going into the awards season of next year. And obviously that's, we still got to see how that all plays out in terms of dates, but what do you see as the fall season looking like with independent films? And have you been talking to some of the independent film distributors about, are they looking at pushing movies into next year because they're worried about overcrowding for that type of audience?
That's a terrific question. I think the fall season is going to be insane. Assuming we're all open again and have some some little bit more than a trickle coming to theaters. So we've been open say three months by then, or 4 months, whatever. I think it'll be a real interesting period. I think the independent product, the award type films, will always take center stage in that period, and I don't think it'll change this year. And I'll tell you why. Because the independents are not, how should I say, they're not dependent on worldwide gross, because they only own, for the most part, North America, or maybe even just the US on the distribution rights of their particular film. So they are going to get it into the marketplace. Now, the rest of the folks are going to have to juggle for space around the world at the same time, because that's, that's how films release now on an international basically a day and date on an international basis, give or take a couple of holidays here and there. But so that they're going to have to find those spots. The independents will be able to move and groove. I mean, they'll be able to get their films open as well as they had done it prior, and maybe even better. Unless there's a huge crowd right at Christmas time for space. I don't know what that'll look like yet. So, Top Gun sitting there, or if there's 12 other Top Guns, then there's going to be some issues. But for the most part, realize that the independents are not reliant on worldwide release.
Thank you.
So I was just thinking that the ArcLight member gift when you're back open should be a reusable ArcLight mask.
That's a good idea.
All of the other cool branded stuff that I've gotten from you guys over the years.
Well, I got to tell you, but where do you find the masks? Because I was out today and I was in Home Depot and Harbor Freight, where you think you could at least get dust masks. The answer to that was no.
Ooh.
So,
well, you got a little bit of time.
We got a little bit of time, but yeah.
I just had one very last thing to ask. Like, there's really so many other topics we could go into, but I am curious because of the fact that some companies might be facing Chapter 11. Is there any concern, indication, or fear of further sort of consolidation of the companies out there that run the entertainment industry by having bigger studios go back to a model of owning theaters?
the last thing a studio is going to do is own theaters. Um, for those who don't remember that, because every once in a while there's an article about breaking the Sherman and Trent Antitrust Act. It got broken long ago. End of the 90s, every studio owned movie theaters. So people have forgotten that or didn't know that. And by the way, they drove each and every one of those companies into the ground. They all went bankrupt. And so by 2001, we had about 12 bankruptcies, a lot of them caused by the studios. A lot of them caused with the advent of stadium seating. So there was a combination of things that went on. But the studios, listen, as we're saying, there's going to be a plethora of available screens. So why if I'm running a studio and I can get those screens and I don't have to pay property tax or rent or staffing or, any of that, all those problems that go along with running an exhibition company, why would you take that on? And hopefully some of those folks do actually remember that they don't know how to run retail. It's a different business.
Well, you definitely could make that case for companies like Paramount and Warner Brothers, but what about Amazon, where you could really maximize that space with Amazon Books, aka a bookstore, Amazon Groceries, Whole Foods?
I think if there's anyone that might be out of that group, whether it's Netflix or, I think Amazon would be the most likely, but at the end of the day, I still think they sit in the same position. Why should we own them? We can get in them anyway. So, the one contradiction to that would be they can go into a movie theater chain and release their films day and date, which was what all the rumors about Netflix buying Landmark, those rumors were last year. That seemed to make sense to the bloggers that were writing about it. But I really don't see a company like Amazon or any other company getting into a business that is going to be struggling for a while, and in the best days is only thin margins, usually in a single-digit percentage.
Ted, I can't thank you enough, and I'm going to have to thank you on behalf of everyone that's here with us because we don't have the chat function running tonight. But this has really been fascinating and a lot to chew on, and I really can't wait for us to be back at ArcLight and see what the future lies.
Me too. I want to thank you, Alex, for really spending a lot of time putting this together, and Elizabeth Daly, who initially sat down with me and said, "Hey, would you do something at SC?" I said, "I'd love to." So I want to thank both you guys for this, and great questions, and great turnout, and thanks for everyone turning out, and most of you even lasted the whole time. So it's excellent.
Well, take care, and take care everyone else at home, and we'll hopefully see each other again soon.
Thank you.